Today's episode is going to be a little bit longer. In this episode, I'm actually going to walk you through a course that I'm building for the Executive Career Accelerator program. This is basically a sneak peek into what courses look like in the ECA. If you're interested in that program, it helps mid-career professionals become executives. There's a link below where you can book a call with one of our Discovery Call coaches to learn if you're a good fit for this program. If you're somebody who's 10 years or more into your career, you have some management experience, and you're thinking you want to move from senior manager or junior director level up to senior director or VP or beyond, if that's interesting to you, then book a call below to learn more about how we might be able to work with you. There's also a video on this channel. The main video is a video that explains the process that we go through and the framework that we use in order to help you be successful in your executive career. But with this video, what we're going to do is we're going to dive into strategic frameworks. So strategic frameworks are tools that executives use in order to understand and build plans based on the vision and the ideas that they have about where the world is going for their organization. So strategies are basically the bridge between vision and plan. And so there are all these different frameworks that executives use in order to kind of figure this world out and then build some plans around it. We're going to go into a pretty in-depth discussion about strategic frameworks. So this is going to be a longer video, but this video is indicative of the kind of content that we put into the Executive Career Accelerator program. In fact, this video probably will be the video that I put into the course. So with that, let's dive into it. All right, everybody, welcome back. We're going to go through today strategic frameworks. There are tons of strategic frameworks that are out there that help executives turn vision into a plan. Remember, strategy is basically the bridge between an executive vision and an executive plan. So strategy is that tool that helps you take great big ideas and turn them into tasks for individuals and measurements to measure along the way. So let's talk about this. We're going to dive in now. Take a look at this. The 4 things we're going to talk about today are the primer on strategic frameworks, my top 3 frameworks that I use, the top 10 strategic frameworks, and really kind of explaining how they're applied. So let's talk about a primer first. So first of all, why do strategic frameworks even matter? It's basically meant to help guide you through a complex world. So navigating the business landscape is like sailing uncharted waters. You need a map, not just a vague sense of direction. Strategic frameworks are those maps, offering structured approaches to analyze your situation, define your goals, and make informed decisions. They provide clarity, alignment, focus, and agility, which is basically the ability to adapt to situations as they change dynamically. If you make an annual strategic plan and stick to it no matter what, and 1 month in the world changes, that's not going to work anymore. So you have to be agile and adaptable in all of the strategies that you employ. Well, who uses strategic frameworks? Well, everyone, quite honestly. We actually all use these without even realizing that we're using them. We just don't call them strategic frameworks, right? But executives use them to understand their overall vision and make strategic decisions. Managers use these to translate strategy into actionable plans and monitor the progress. Managers are the ones that are looking downwards into the organization, measuring the organization, making sure it's working optimally, right? Teams use this to collaborate effectively so they understand what their goals are and how to work together towards those goals. And then consultants who kind of stand outside looking into an organization, even from a perspective that executives can't have. They look at how an organization should be after a massive transformation that the organization is thinking they want to take themselves through. So when do you apply these different frameworks? Well, when you're facing major challenges, such as a new competitor has come in and started to eat your lunch, changing market dynamics, maybe the business isn't what it was, or either in good ways or bad ways, or significant growth opportunities, which if you are in a business that's growing, you need to be strategic about how you grow that organization so that you don't break the system. You can do this to also set new goals, improve coordination, and make critical decisions, such as evaluating whether you should do some M&A activity, M&A being mergers and acquisitions. So should you acquire a partner and now have a bigger foothold on the market? Should you acquire a supplier so that you're now vertically integrated and you lower your cost basis? Should you acquire a customer and be the supplier to that customer and then improve the customer's business? So there's all kinds of things where these strategic frameworks can help you think about in that sense as well. Choosing the right strategic framework can be a little bit difficult because there are a lot of them and they have different purposes. So how do you choose the right framework? Well, I use the analogy of choosing a right framework is like picking the right trail when you're hiking. It depends on a lot of things. Like with hiking, it depends depends on where you're trying to go and what your fitness is or what the terrain is like. So the same for choosing a strategic framework. Your situation is important, whether you're growing or shrinking or fighting off something or thinking more long-term or short-term as well. Your culture and the resources available to actually implement a strategic framework. Some of these are very, very complex, and they're basically only done by consultants because they're so complex. So don't be afraid to mix and match elements from all of these frameworks. I actually kind of build hybrid tools from all of these. So I'll talk through these frameworks and then you can decide which of these frameworks are useful for you. First, let me tell you about my top 3 frameworks. These are the ones that I use almost religiously and consistently in every business venture that I'm in. And sometimes I even use these frameworks for my own personal growth as well. So my top 3 frameworks are SWOT, OKR, and Blue Ocean. And I'm throwing in a bonus one here called Theory of Constraints, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So I use these 3 frameworks because I tend to be on the early side of business. I'm really kind of focused on startup environments primarily, or getting something going, getting it off the ground. So I'm the kind of guy that really enjoys like jumping off of a hill with all of the parts and building an airplane on the way down, right? Not everybody is like that. And so not everybody is going to see this world the same way that I do. But these frameworks, SWOT, OKR, and Blue Ocean, definitely help me envision where I want to take a new organization. And so that's why I tend to use those frameworks. But there's different types of people, right? So most people really fall into 3 categories: starter, scaler, and maintainer. And so a starter, which is who I am, I tend to thrive in startup environments where on any given day, you could be building $1 billion business or declaring bankruptcy or dissolving the business or pivoting to an entirely different industry. I actually thrive on that kind of dynamic environment. I'm comfortable in that world. Others aren't as comfortable with that kind of existential chaos constantly happening, but they're also attracted to the 100x growth opportunities where you can grow something orders of magnitude. That's exciting to a lot of people. So they want to make sure that payroll is there, but they also want to build something and break it so they can build it again and break it and build it again and so on, right? So those are scalers. Those are people that I would put into the scaler category. And then there's maintainers. Maintainers are people who kind of like to keep things exactly as they are while making tweaks and changes here and there to kind of keep from falling behind. So someone who wants to grow an organization by 2 to 3% every year, year over year, is a maintainer. They may also want to refresh systems and frameworks and make something that's really good even better. That's a maintainer in my mind. So starters, scalers, and maintainers. These frameworks that I'm going to show you are good for each environment in different ways, but you'll see which ones kind of map more towards maintainers versus starters and scalers. There's other frameworks that are more valuable for different environments, but I've been able to adapt most of the frameworks that I use, my top 3, into just about any business environment, including large businesses. So for example, when I ran sales and strategy for a publicly traded company, I used OKR, SWOT, and Blue Ocean, and some Theory of Constraints when running our annual week-long strategic planning sessions. So even though that these tools are really designed for startup environments, they can absolutely be scaled to larger organizations as well. So now I'm going to walk you through those top 10 strategic frameworks for executives, and then I'm going to go into more detail on them in a minute. But let's just get like the frameworks out of the way so that you would understand what they're called, okay? So the first one is SWOT, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So a SWOT analysis is basically you're doing an internal look with your strengths and weaknesses and an external look at the environment where you're looking at the opportunities and threats that are out. So the situation you would use a SWOT is when you're analyzing internal strengths and weaknesses as well as external opportunities and threats. The benefit is providing a pretty comprehensive overview of the landscape, and the downside is that it can be overly simplistic. This is true. If you want to keep things simple, SWOT is a way to do that. If you want to be more nuanced and complex, SWOT is going to fall short in your goals there. Porter's 5 Forces is the next one. So Porter's 5 Forces basically is all about assessing the competitiveness in an industry. It helps you understand competitive pressures and identify the potential threats that are coming from the market, right? The downside is that it relies on industry-specific data and may not fully capture unique situations. Like it's a very overly simplistic, again, model framework to kind of think about things. If there's 5 forces, it may not consider some other things, where other frameworks are more nuanced. McKinsey 7S model, this is evaluating alignment between internal elements So the 7 elements are strategy, structure, systems, styles, staff, shared values, and skills, the 7 S's. And so this is for successful strategy execution. They just love their S's here. It promotes holistic thinking and identifies potential misalignments, but it can be cumbersome to implement and requires significant amount of internal data. It's a McKinsey model, and McKinsey thrives on coming in and helping organizations understand themselves better than they can. So that's why McKinsey uses a relatively complex tool like this. But this is definitely a comprehensive framework that does work if you are really wanting to get proctologic and understanding how your business is growing. BCG Growth Matrix. I like this one a lot. It's prioritizing investment decisions for product portfolios based on market growth and market share. So basically, it's providing clear guidance for allocation of resources based on potential. And what this means is that it's helping you decide, do you want to grow in this way, grow in that way? Should you milk your cash cow? Should you get rid of the dogs? Like you'll see the framework for this. It's actually pretty simple, and I think you'll enjoy it. OKR framework, objectives and key results framework. Very simple tool that's actually more powerful than people might realize. It's about setting ambitious goals and cascading those goals down into focused alignment and collaboration. So what that means is you're taking objectives that you have, you define what the key results are that measure whether you've actually hit that objective, and then there are all these individual tasks that you hand out and dole out and focus on. So the downside to this is it requires strong commitment and discipline from the leadership and the teams to stay focused on these OKRs and ignore other things that are popping up inside of the business, which I'm not sure if that's a downside. Balanced scorecard. One of the most complex tools I've ever seen in my life was a balanced scorecard. It took 2 years to implement this in a company, and it never worked. I remember watching the balanced scorecard consultants running around trying to get people to use it. And it was just like, this is terrible. This is probably my least favorite of the 10 strategic frameworks. But you can measure performance beyond solely financial metrics, considering customer internal processes and learning growth perspectives, right? So it promotes a balanced view of success, and it drives action across dimensions, but it can be complex to implement and measure effectively. And when I say complex, I mean, this is hard. There are people who dedicate their lives to BSC, and God bless them. PESTLE analysis. This one's kind of cool. It's kind of in the middle of like maybe being complex, but maybe not too much. It's understanding the influence of macroeconomic factors such as political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental on strategy. So this is helping you raise awareness of external trends and potential disruptions. If you think about the SWOT analysis, opportunities and threats side of it, you could actually use a PESTLE analysis to augment your understanding of the SWOT. And that's how I would use a PESTLE, by the way. But it requires ongoing monitoring and may not directly translate into actionable insights. You may understand the geopolitical and macroeconomic environments, but how does that translate to your business? That is a challenge with using the PESTLE framework by itself, which is why, in my perspective, I like to blend PESTLE with SWOT. Blue Ocean strategy, one of my favorite strategic frameworks, as I mentioned above. What's great about Blue Ocean is it teaches you how to find environments where there is no competition. When you are in a quote-unquote red ocean, imagine a pool of sharks swimming around, chewing up all of the feedstock. And so basically the water is full of blood. That's why it's called red ocean. Well, you go out to a part of the ocean where there's no sharks and you can fish for days. The thing about blue oceans is that sometimes they're blue because there's nothing there. And so I actually like the term I've heard recently called pink ocean strategy, where there's just a little bit of blood in the water because it's indicative of like other people hunting and killing something in that water. Whereas a blue ocean might just be devoid of anything worth fishing for. So anyway, the strategy basically helps you kind of think about how you can innovate into a new space. You could take an existing product or service and put it into a different market, or reposition a product and service in a way that's different. So for example, if you think about the smartphone market, when the iPad showed up, it was a blue ocean product. There were no tablets in 2010 when the iPad showed up. And so it became the de facto best tablet in the market, and for years had an advantage over every other tablet. So think about like an iPad as basically creating a blue ocean market for itself. Number 9 is scenario planning, and this is basically how you prepare for uncertain futures by envisioning and exploring alternative scenarios. The military loves scenario planning. This is something that there are people in the Pentagon who just war game all day. They imagine something happening in Colombia, Venezuela, or in Israel, or in Taiwan, or anywhere in the world, in any of the powder keg spots. They imagine, how can this spill over and how would we respond to it? Well, corporations can do this as well, and scenario planning is a tool that I recommend companies that have have a lot to lose. So high risk, high growth, high venture opportunities need to be aware of the risks around them at any given time. And those can be all kinds of risks: geopolitical, economic, consumer sentiment, and so forth. So you do scenario planning where you're like, what if this, then we would do that, right? And so scenario planning is basically putting plans for certain scenarios on the books so that if this thing happens, you open that book and like, okay, here's our plan. Here's what we do in this situation, as opposed to being caught flat-footed and not knowing what to do in a crisis. So I like scenario planning to a point. I think it can go crazy. You can have 100 scenarios planned out, and then when one of them happens, you can realize that, well, we figured this out 5 years ago and now it's old. So that's the other thing about scenario planning, is that, like, as Mike Tyson said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And then, the plan may go out the window and you have to be more dynamic than what your strategic plan says that you should be in that particular scenario. It's a really cool tool in certain situations for the right kinds of things. And then number 10 is one that I had not heard of, but the more I did research on it, it's kind of cool, if not really cumbersome. It's called Hoshin Kanri. And Hoshin Kanri is a strategic planning framework that it uses cross-functional alignment and cascading goals. That's a really fancy way of saying that it basically tells lots of people in a matrix, these are our goals, and here's your assignments for them, and here's how we're going to measure them. And when I show you the graphic for this, you'll understand this a little bit better. This is a commitment. This is a little bit like how Kaiser Permanente is different than all the rest of the health carriers. Another way, like you only buy from Amway kind of thing, like Hoshin Kanri has to be embodied inside of your culture for this to work. And everyone from the CEO to the janitor have to believe and agree in using Hoshin Kanri in a fully expressed way. So kind of a complex process, but the research that I did on it today was like, this actually is pretty useful. So just keep it in the back of your mind. We'll talk through that. Okay, so those are the 10 frameworks that I've kind of pulled out as being, from my perspective, the top 10 strategic frameworks for executives. If you have thoughts on other strategic frameworks that are useful, then let me know about them. I'd love to have a conversation about whether I can throw some of these out. Like, I'd love to not include Balanced Scorecard because I just think it's a terrible, terrible tool for management. But let me know if you have other strategic frameworks that you're aware of. Let me just collapse this and I'll get more detailed in these frameworks now. So I'll start first of all with SWOT. So SWOT, again, pretty straightforward. Basically, you are mapping out your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. And if you think about what that means, what are your strengths, your organization's strengths? Well, we're really good at doing these things. We have a strong relationship with this customer. We're known as the #1 company for X, right? Those are your strengths. What are your weaknesses? Be honest about your weaknesses. A lot of people like to say, well, we're the #1 in this and this and this and this, and you're probably like number 4 in a lot of them. So be honest about what the weaknesses of your organization are. Opportunities are more external. So if strengths and weaknesses are looking inside at yourself, kind of, an intrinsic look, opportunities and threats is extrinsic. It's looking external to your company. What opportunities exist in the marketplace? Almost every SWOT that I see these days includes the term AI. AI is an opportunity and a threat for everyone. If you think about how AI can turn your company into a 10x revenue generator, but it can also, if someone gets there first, they could take 90% of your market share. So AI is one of these things that you have to be aware of as an opportunity for your organization or as a threat to your organization. So SWOT is basically, you build this quad chart with these 4 things and it helps you understand what's out there. And there's a really cool YouTube video here in this link that you can access. By the way, this website, I will make this available in the video description below. So you'll be able to access this website here. So I've built on Notion, but I'll make this available so that you can link to all of these things that are in here. And all of the pictures that I've pulled, they are credited to the websites that I pulled these from. But here's a great video about SWOT, if that's useful to you. By the way, just one more thing with SWOT. We use SWOT inside of the Executive Career Accelerator, but in a different way. I have every individual executive who joins the program actually do a SWOT on themselves. What are their personal strengths and weaknesses? What are their career opportunities and threats? What's happening in their industry, right? So helping people get clarity about that helps them, first of all, think strategically, but also understand strategically what's going on with them and what might be holding them back and where they should be aiming their energy and resources. So SWOT is a great tool, not just for businesses, but for yourself as well. Porter's 5 forces, this is going back to my MBA program. I remember this was one of the things that we learned there. There are 5 forces that you think about when you're talking about Porter's 5 forces. So rivalry from your competitors, the threat of substitute products, the threat of new entrants into your market, the bargaining power of buyers, and the bargaining power of suppliers. So if you think about this, your competitors are constantly thinking about the market the same way you are. How do they win that customer from you? Or how do you win that customer from them? That's always going to be going on, and that's healthy. That's what keeps companies moving upwards. Without competition, you wind up with monopolies like AT&T in the 70s that couldn't innovate themselves out of a paper bag with one hole in it. So competition rivalry is a good thing, but you have to stay on your toes. You have to engage in this, stay ahead of your competitor, or at least as a peer to your competitor. The threat of substitute products. A substitute product for a calculator is a smartphone. We don't sell very many calculators anymore. If you go back to the 1960s, mechanical watches were all the rage, and then in the 70s, quartz watches became available, and quartz watches were dramatically cheaper than mechanical watches, and that caused a crisis in the watch market. So substitute product can change all of the dynamics in your market. Threat of new entrants. So when a new entrant comes into the market, say like Tesla and Rivian are competing with Ford and GM and Acura and dealers like that. So new entrants can change the dynamics of a market, and the bargaining power of buyers, whether they can afford to buy more or not, if they have more selection or not, changes their bargaining power, and the bargaining power of suppliers, right? Costs may go up and they may just require you to spend more. And if all of the suppliers are raising their prices at the same time, you don't have a choice but to pay more. So all of these things, these forces really influence primarily product-driven companies is what this is focused on. So it's a really good framework for understanding retail, manufacturing. Like if you're trying to sell software, this is a great tool for that. So product managers tend to use Porter's 5 forces, and there's a pretty good article on Investopedia about it. The McKinsey 7S model, as I mentioned, you have strategy, skills, staff, structure, system, style, and shared values. Kind of a cool frame. It's very holistic. It really does kind of delve deeply into, what's happening inside of a large organization. So 7S isn't really going to be valuable to a company with like 50 employees. But if you have 50,000 employees, this is going to be helpful for you to understand where the strengths of your organization are and how everything interconnects with each other. This is also really valuable to companies that tend to be siloed. So if you have a company that is more of a federation of businesses that never talk to each other, McKinsey 7S can help kind of unveil some synergies between those divisions inside of a larger framework. And you can learn more on mindtools.com. BCG. So I actually really like this framework. I almost included this in my top 3, but I already had 3 plus honorable mention, so I didn't. But this BCG matrix is probably the simplest way to think about your offerings in a marketplace, right? So what you have is you have market growth being, low to high, and then you have relative market share, low to high in the negative X direction. So you have these products or offerings that are high growth and high relative market share. Those are your stars. You want to invest heavily in these star products or services, right? Then down here, you have low market growth. They're not growing anymore, but they still have relatively high market share. Those are cash cows. So you want to quote unquote milk this cash cow for as long as you can. Up here, you have this question mark, which is high growth and low share. These are basically, you see an opportunity in a market, the market's growing, but you haven't quite penetrated it yet. This is where a lot of the work is done in this framework. When you think about these opportunities, do you want to invest in the innovation and the marketing and the know-how to actually build out products in this category? Would they become stars, or would they become what the 4th category is a dog? And a dog is, I actually like dogs. I don't know why I use dog, but dogs are low growth, low share. This is businesses that you should divest, liquidate, get rid of, right? So if you have something that's low growth, low market share, get rid of it. Instead, invest in these stars and these cows, and then think about whether you want to grow some things that are low market share but high market growth opportunities into new businesses. So that's BCG kind of at a very high level. There's a YouTube video that explains this. It's really valuable. So OKR framework, this is one that I use a lot. I love OKR. I couldn't pick, there was like 20 graphics that I wanted to show here, but I didn't want to dive into a whole dissertation on OKR alone. OKR, objectives and key results. It's pretty simple, and I'll explain it as simply as I can. Basically, you as an organization decide that you have an objective. My objective is to hit. So for Vertical Motion, I'll just use my company. We want to help 100 people become executives in 2024. That is our strategic objective for 2024. There are key results to that. So that means we have to basically bring in a certain number of people in order to do that. So if we want to successfully transition 100 executives from mid-manager to executive level, we probably have to bring in 120 to 150 people into the program, and that translates to about 10 to 15 people a month that we want to bring into the program. So right there, the objective is 100 transformed executives. A key result that defines that would be 150 people brought into the program. And there's other key results that I can measure, and those become what we drive towards. Those key results, those are the metrics that we focus on. And whatever those metrics are, then there are actions assigned to people in order to make those things happen. So I have on my team marketing and sales people who are dedicated to driving towards that goal, and their incentives are aligned that way, so that if we hit that 12 to 15 person people joining the program a month goal, they're incentivized for that, and they have accelerators on the other side of that. So that's a way that you can use OKR to kind of manage your business in a very simplistic way. This is simplistic, and I use OKR for each aspect of the business. And so we use it kind of at the high level right now for Vertical Motion, because Vertical Motion really only does one thing. But in the future, Vertical Motion might do 3 or 4 different things. I would use OKRs for all 4 or 5 of those things, as opposed to just one massive OKR for different products, different services, different ways that the business works. So keep that in mind, that this is almost a better tool for a product line or a market vertical than it is for kind of a high level strategic thing for a corporation that has multiple lines of businesses and technologies and so forth. WhatMatters.com has a really great deep dive on OKRs as well. Also, Techstars. I learned this in Techstars. There's a website called toolkit.techstars.com. I'll put that link down below as well. Toolkit.techstars.com is a great resource for anyone who wants to start a company or understand how businesses work at a very high level. All right, halfway through. Number 6, balanced scorecard. Now, this is the one that I've talked about that's like very complicated from my perspective. The implementation is far more difficult. I've not seen this done well. I bet someone has done this well. I'd love for someone to share an example with me of balanced scorecard actually working well, because this thing hasn't gone away. It was formed in, I think, the 80s, very popular in the 90s and 2000s, and it's still around here in 2024. So basically, balanced scorecard is all about these 4 different metrics that you're building. So there's a financial scorecard, and we all know what that is. That's the balance sheet, the income statement, and a statement of cash flows, right? So to succeed financially, how should we appear to our shareholders? So you create these objectives, these KPIs, these targets, and initiatives. Okay, so basically what Balanced Scorecard is doing is it's taking OKR, but it's applying it in 4 basic areas of the organization. So there's financial, internal business process, learning and growth, and your customer. So to achieve our vision, how should we appear to our customer? And so this is basically creates a scorecard of like, what does our customer care about? Well, for example, if it's a product company, timely delivery, no failures or RMAs, that kind of thing. So you can measure these things on these scorecards. Over time, you can look for trends of failure or success and so forth. Again, very complicated process. I wouldn't roll this out on your own. I would work with a consultant on this. Investopedia has a better article on this than I can describe it with. Clearly not one of my favorite frameworks, but still one of the top 10 nonetheless. So I see Pestle as being a tool that's really helpful with the SWOT analysis. The Pestle framework is really good for understanding your opportunities and threats. And here's what I mean. With Pestle, you are going to be looking at political, economical, social, technological, legal, and environmental challenges and opportunities that are out there. So if you think of like your organization kind of operating out in the world, what are the macroeconomic and geopolitical things that are happening that can impact your business? So Pestle is a way, from my perspective, I would use this primarily to look at opportunities and threats on a larger SWOT analysis of the organization. Really cool tool. Actually, I like it a lot. Tutor2u.net has a pretty interesting software. There's a link down here in the references that gives you a link to how to use Pestle in different ways. But again, I would just only use Pestle as part of a larger SWOT. framework. Scenario planning, we talked about this again. This is basically guessing at what might happen in the world and then building a plan for that scenario. So you define what these things are, you explore some ways to deal with it, you create the plan, you communicate the plan, you act on the plan, and then you embed that into the systems of your organization. Kind of a cool thing, if you're really into like mind games, you are, for example, if you're an INTJ or an INTP, you're gonna love scenario planning because it's basically you sitting in your head all day like, what if? Well, what if that happens? What if an asteroid hits? What if that happens? Like, this is what scenario planning is, and there are people who just love this and they will sit here and create, and dream up scenarios all day long and dream up plans and counter plans and counter plans to all the scenarios. And so great framework if that's your thing. It's not mine, so I don't use it very often. GSG.org has a pretty cool toolkit for that. Blue Ocean Strategy, like I said, one of my favorite frameworks because I love the simplicity of it. Basically, with Red Ocean Strategies, you're competing in existing markets, you try to beat the competition, you are exploiting existing demand, you're making a value cost trade-off, and you align the whole system with strategic choice of either differentiation or low cost, right? So you got to be better or you have to be cheaper in a red ocean. On a blue ocean strategy, right? So you are creating uncontested markets to serve. You are making the competition irrelevant. There is no competition in a blue ocean. Create and capture new demand that didn't exist. You break the value trade-off, right? The value cost trade-off. So like, is there more value for the buyer than the costs, right? So you get out of that paradigm because at the end of the day, in the blue ocean, the price does not tie to the cost. The price ties to the value that's perceived by the buyer. So if your product costs $100 to make, but it solves $1 million, you don't have to charge $100 plus 20%. You can charge $1 million because that's the value that's perceived by your customer. And that's where blue ocean is that if you don't have competition for what you're doing, if there's not a lot of people doing what you're doing in a blue ocean, or I like to use the term pink ocean, so there's a little bit of blood, so you know that there's actually activity in that area, then you're going to find a lot of value in using this strategy because it will help you see how you can basically grow an entire business that didn't exist before and have a competitive advantage over anyone who joins the market after you've established the market. I'll give you an example of how I use Blue Ocean. There is almost nobody talking about how to become an executive on YouTube, and I've really leaned into my YouTube channel to try to help people understand what it means to be an executive, how to become an executive, what are the key skills and key traits and key things that you need to know in order to make that transition in your career. There's not a lot of people who do that. There's maybe 4 or 5 of us out there that I've seen that have reasonably good content and that is current and up to date. So that's kind of a blue ocean. It's a little pink because there's other people doing it, but not many. There's not millions of us, right? There's millions of people who teach fitness and nutrition and health and weight loss, but there's thousands of people who teach leadership and executive careers, and you can see the size of the market matters. So as many people who want to become executives as there are that people that want to be fit. So from my perspective, I'm in a blue ocean right now. So I hope that's helpful. And then Hoshin Kanri, again, I don't know much about this framework except that it is complicated, but the more I looked into it, I actually really liked it. It actually kind of makes sense to me in a way. This doesn't make any sense. When you look at this is an eye chart, and I'm not even going to try to explain it in this video, but I will say that Hoshin Kanri, I can see why it has this like cult-like following of people who apply this in organizations. And the analogy I used earlier was like Kaiser Permanente is not a health insurance company. It is a health system that has insurance and doctors and specialists and outpatient stuff. When you're inside of Kaiser Permanente, you're inside of it, and it's not like you can easily go other places. It's weird, right? Hoshin Kanri is like that. Like, you lean into this 100% from the leader to the janitor, and everyone has to be following this. Anyway, it's a really cool framework. If you want to learn more about it, you can go to leanproduction.com. They have a really good article that talks about it there, but I'll just kind of leave it there because I like it. I want you to be aware of it, but man, it is a massive commitment to turn your company into people who can walk around with these in their hands and constantly be updating these daily. So that being said, so those are the 10 frameworks that I mentioned, right? And in a little more detail detail in how they work. Again, like I said, this is a long video. This is basically what you need to know in order to understand strategy and strategic frameworks. So we've gone through a primer on strategic frameworks, my top 3 frameworks, and what these top 10 frameworks are like. The last thing that I'll mention here is that I mentioned that I had this bonus framework, Theory of Constraints. Theory of Constraints is not a strategic framework. However, it is an incredibly powerful tool that I've found useful when trying to figure out when something is broken. So I'll give you an example. A couple of months ago, we were building Vertical Motion. One of the things that I realized was that we were booking more clients than I could support. At the time, I was doing one-on-one client consultation, and that meant that every single person that bought into the Executive Career Accelerator program, I would set up weekly one-on-one calls for an hour with them. Well, after we had 15 clients in the program, that's 15 hours a week dedicated to my clients, and it wasn't scalable. And so the constraint in that situation was my time. My time was becoming more and more constrained because I was also needing to be on 10 to 15 hours worth of discovery calls with potential clients. So I was working 40, 50 hours a week just on Zoom calls before I even got to do any content on Instagram or YouTube, or even think about any of the other business functions, or think about making a course. So I actually had to shut the business down a little bit on the marketing side. For the month of September, we basically took no calls. And in the month of September, we had very few actual sales. And we did that on purpose because I needed to build a course that would allow my clients to go through the course, reduce my one-on-one time with them from an hour to 30 minutes, and then ultimately also build up this group coaching program with other people that they can work on things that they can be helped with in different ways than what I can do. So I'm really good with the leadership stuff, but now we have people in the program who are ideally suited to help you with your LinkedIn profile, with your resume, with the content, with mock interviewing, with preparing yourself for communications with executive recruiters and hiring managers, right? I can do those things, but so can these other people in the program now. And that takes a huge amount of burden off my time. So the constraint was my time, and we basically lifted that constraint by taking my time, my one-on-one time with people, and reducing it, and instead using these systems with the course and the group coaching and the other coaches in the program, so that now I spend about 15 hours a week in one-to-one calls as opposed to 50 hours a week in one-to-one calls. And this is way more sustainable for me. I don't want to give up on being one-to-one with my clients and with potential clients, but I also need to recognize that I can only do so much, and at some point there'll be other constraints in the business. So I like Theory of Constraints in order to understand when something is holding your organization back from the next level of success. When you feel like you've hit a plateau, use the Theory of Constraints framework to think about how you can actually figure out what's broken and what needs to be improved or increased or changed or removed altogether. So Theory of Constraints is a great tool for that. I love it. That's why I included it as a bonus to my top 3 frameworks here. In here, I've also included basically this, like, when to use this framework rubric. And so what I went through was I kind of, figured out what each of these are good and bad at. So Porter's 5 Forces is excellent at analyzing competition, whereas OKRs has nothing to do with analyzing competition. So you can see depending on what you're trying to do here, will help you understand which framework to use. And then I went ahead and just kind of ranked them. And SWOT, ironically, is probably the highest ranked framework, which is part of the reason why I use it. OKR is rated fairly high, but it's really internal focused, and that's why, it has this low rating in analyzing competition. So you could use this framework here, or this rubric here, to understand where you can apply these different strategic frameworks in your organization. So that's today's topic. I know this was a long video, but it's very informative, and I want you to take away that this is what we do in the course. So if you're interested in being in the Executive Career Accelerator and learning things like this on many topics, and having like-minded people be in the same situation as you, trying to move forward in your career, then book a call, talk with me or one of the discovery coaches on how we can help you make that leap in your program. The program is clearly laid out in a video on the main channel. The price of the program is in there. I don't hide anything from anyone. I'm very transparent about things. It's $7,500 as of today, which is January 28th. It'll probably be going up in April, but $7,500 for the program. One-time payment gives you 12 months of access to the program and courses like this. So if this is useful to you, this is valuable, I'd love for you to book a call, just have a conversation. It's a low pressure call. We're not trying to close you on the call. If you're not ready to make payment. It's nothing like that. We're professionals, we're executives. We want to treat you the same way, and we expect you to treat us as professionals as well. So if you're interested in that, give us a call. Let's have a conversation. Then this one. Cheers.